government. Let's take you straight to our talking point here on India at 9. This is the big crisis confronting the government. 40 Indians have not just gone missing, they have been now kidnapped. The government will possibly be looking at evacuation in the next couple of days if matters turn to the worst. Let me introduce my panel. KC Singh is joining us, former diplomat. I'm also being joined by Commodore retired M.R. Khan. He has served as a defense attaché in the region and as a speaker at the NDC, the National Defense Council. And Vijay Prashad is with us once again tonight on India at 9. He is at the American University of Beirut, joining us via Skype from Lebanon. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us. KC Singh, I'll take it straight to you. What are the options that the government currently has to rescue these Indians who have been abducted, considering the facts of the case, that we know there are no ransom calls and we don't even know the identity of the group who could be behind this kidnapping?
You see, firstly, right in the middle of what is almost a civil war, the fog of a civil war, you'll get conflicting opinions, news and so on and so forth. So we don't know what the reality is. So first thing the government would be doing is to sort out what are the real facts, where are they at the moment. Now, one thing which is clear, and there are a lot of finger pointing doesn't help at this point to say this company did, that company did, because the company was, from what you have recounted, actually trying to help them, and that was the most logical thing to do, is to move into the Kurdish area, because that is a stable zone in the north. So if they were abducted moving to the Kurdish area, probably they were doing the right thing. But if they've been taken away from there, now what would happen is the ministry has sent Suresh Reddy. He was an ambassador there. He's an exceedingly good diplomat. He's worked with me, and I think he'll have excellent contacts. Now the ones he'll deal with would be the Kurds. He'll deal with, maybe he has assets in the Sunni heartland where the tribal leaders are now allies of the ISIS. He would also be talking, we should also be talking to the Saudis and the Qataris, because they've been funding ISIS in the past. Even though the Saudis say they are not involved with it, but the intelligence minister is somewhere in the background behind all this, what is happening. Iranians cannot help you there. The Iraqi government cannot help you in the north, not in the areas that they have lost. So we are dealing with the Iraqi government for any extraction of Indians from areas within their control, Indians who want to leave, like from Najaf and so on and so forth. But in other places, and really Indian military assets can't do anything. What you can do can be send in your Air Force planes to Baghdad to lift the people if they need to be lifted out, if the civilian planes are not, civil aircraft are not available. So you talk to different people, but I think it is unnecessary at that moment and even dangerous, as Chief Minister Badal did, though he himself had a doubt about it, to talk of ransom. We must not talk of that. Many countries in the world maintain this, that we do not pay a ransom. Because if we start saying up front you want to pay a ransom, then the other person is going to negotiate you till the cows come home. You don't do that. You begin by saying, I do not pay a ransom. And you please, and use the other assets. And if it has to be paid, I remember it was paid. It was probably paid in case of the lorry drivers in 2005 or 6, but we use their employers, the companies, to pay it. But governments paying ransom, it becomes then an invitation in future for Indians to be picked up in different places. A very dangerous game.
And so I think we'll have to give it to the Chief Minister. He was a little hesitant about it. My question to you my question to you really on the first part of how you answer this question, that there are going to be lots of conflicting reports that come in. Some of the reports that we've managed to source from family members who have been in touch with the abducted Indians, possibly from 24 to 48 hours ago, seem to be suggesting that they are safe, they're being treated well, seem to be suggesting that this perhaps may not really be an abduction oblique a kidnapping, but they do feel they have been abandoned with really no travel documents as well to speak about.
I wouldn't go with that. Don't believe anything that ISIS or Taliban or these militant groups say.
This is not ISIS, this is the family. This is not the ISIS, this is the family members who've been in touch with. Yes.
Not true, but they said the ISIS people told these people that you're welcome to stay on, it will find you an exit route. Now, I don't trust any of these guys. The militants in the field, they will sell you to the devil, they may sell you to the next guy who wants to trade you off. We don't know, because there are multiple groups floating around. Another set of groups that probably diplomat Suresh Reddy will talk to would be the tribal leaders in the Sunni belt. They are also aligning with ISIS.
Right.
You know, we have to talk to not external elements, but elements within Iraq, within northern Iraq, which are Sunni, which we have dealt with, and which now may be aligned with ISIS.
Right.
They are in a position to put pressure on ISIS.
Ambassador Singh, there is also talk among the diplomatic community, and I believe this would be protocol in a sense when you confront a situation or a hostage situation like this one, that you would be in touch perhaps with humanitarian agencies because they have channels of communication with many of these groups. Sometimes even construction companies, because they're operating in conflict areas like this one, have some kind of a tacit agreement with some of these groups.
Yes, that is true, but the companies can sometimes be a double-edged weapon because the company may not be willing to pay. They may get greedy and demand a lot of money from the company because the company would also have equipment there. They'll also have other kinds of assets left behind. So then your individuals may get stuck in this larger deal that the company may or may not do with the militant organizations because they'll have a complex range of issues to deal with. So this, I think we have to focus on our people, see how we can extract them, use the carrot and the stick, but we don't talk upfront of any ransom money and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Ambassador Singh, I have a stack of questions more for you, but I'll just switch on to my other panelists for a bit. Commodore, if I can bring you in a situation like this, where it is very, very clear that there is no one authority's writ that is running large as far as Iraq is concerned. If the government was to even negotiate or begin the process of negotiation, it obviously is very clear it's not going to be with one identity.
I think you're right, because there are a number of groups which are operating in the region, and there are Naqshbandians, there are Ansar, there are tribal heads. They all the Sunni groups are cooperating with the ISIS, and it's not ISIS alone because it has got only about 2,500 people. So this kind of territory could not have been won by ISIS by themselves alone. So what we can do is, one thing which is in our favor is that ISIS is trying to establish that everything is normal in Mosul and people must return to Mosul, except for the fact that we have taken it away from the Shia government and we are going to control Mosul. And so it's unlikely that they would maltreat whatever these hostages they have taken, Indian hostages they have taken. So I think if we wait a while, there will be something coming up, and some group will be sort of sending us a message as to whether they want to negotiate with a ransom or something else. So I think there is really no need to panic, and I don't think that ISIS is going to make any more enemies, and particularly when they are saying that the whole international community is going to get lined up against them. Iran is against them, even Turkey has condemned it. So I think this situation is not as hopeless as it might appear on the surface.
Okay, and you're possibly saying that there needs to be a little bit of a wait and watch. I'm not trying to get into a blame game here, Commodore, but do you believe the Indian government has really done enough to match up to this crisis that is actually unfolding in a very volatile situation?
I think because the situation is so sort of confused and nobody knows who is controlling what areas, whether they are Sunni tribal groups, whether ISIS has some kind of a structure which is controlling these regions, and the Iraqi government certainly does not have any control over these regions. In fact, much of the trouble is because of the Iraqi government. It is Nouri al-Maliki and his sort of transport minister, Amr al-Hadi, who have precipitated this situation by dealing with Sunnis in the most brutal manner in last 3-4 years and not even giving it to their modest demands. So I don't think that Iraqi government will have any clout with ISIS or any of these Sunni tribal groups which are sworn enemies of the Baghdad government. I think it will have to be through humanitarian groups that we can negotiate over a period.
Right. Vijay, if I can bring you in here into this discussion, when the Ministry of External Affairs came out with that confirmation, it was a very cryptic 2 to 3 liner actually confirming that 40 Indians were abducted, were kidnapped. There were no indications of any ransom call, their whereabouts, etc. The government also did not even go as far as to say that who they believed could be behind this particular abduction. But everyone here on the panel seems to be pointing towards the ISIS. Would that be fair?
Well, it's certainly fair because ISIS has a track record of kidnapping or abducting foreigners largely and seeking ransom. We know that there are already companies in Bakuba which have foreign workers who have approached ISIS commanders and offered to pay protection money. This has been the case when ISIS was the Islamic State of Iraq before they expanded in 2012. This is how they made, initially the millions of dollars that allowed them to take Fallujah and then Ramadi in December of 2013, January of 2014. I think it's extremely important that the Indian government, we know, is already in touch with the Iraqi Red Crescent Society, which has reasonably good relations with ISIS and has had this relationship not only in Iraq but also in Syria, where the Syria Red Crescent Society has helped negotiate the release of journalists, the 2 Spanish journalists who were picked up by ISIS in Syria. So there is a track record of working through the Red Crescent Society.
Right.
I think Ambassador Singh is also correct. It's a good time to make a phone call to Riyadh.
It's a good time to make a phone call to Riyadh and get those diplomatic initiatives going, because Ambassador KC Singh, many of these countries really could be of big help to maintain, to first start that contact and then do any further negotiations on behalf of New Delhi.
No, you have to work at multiple levels. We are probably a little slow because I think the top echelons were all in Bhutan, and by the time they came back, this was already full-blown. But the crisis had been building up for a week. And this is not the first time. We've seen it in the past also, that when a thing like this happens, we wake up after the event, because often the mission doesn't even know how many Indians are there in which part of a country. So we have old protocols on this, that we must maintain local contacts in all these towns who should be in touch with the Indians, or at least aware of their contact numbers. And now in the world of the mobile phones and Facebook and all, this is something that we need to do. If we have a large worker population all over this extremely unstable area, we must at least have a fix on them. We must know how many are where. And not wait until somebody is picked up and then their family starts telling us.
Right.
Then you're behind the curve.
Then you're behind the curve. Ambassador KC Singh, so looking at the landscape as it currently is, with 40 abducted, many others scattered in different parts of Iraq, what would you urge really the government to do? Question number 1. And question number 2, does the question of evacuating the Indians there in Iraq rise at this point in time, or we need to sort out this crisis first and then look at a complete evacuation?
No, I think you have to function on both, because they are a much larger number in the south. Now, often what happens is that people don't voluntarily want to move because they have financial commitments, their salaries have not been paid. But I think the country has to take a call, because any single individual then becomes a national issue and a national problem. So you take a call that this is an unsafe area, and you just basically tell people to move out and make sure they move out. But if they are not moving out, then, let them give a commitment, let them know the consequences of what will follow, or at least have a fallback protocol. It's possible people don't move out. You can't force them to move back.
Absolutely. In fact, some of the...
you can... Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt again. In fact, some of the nurses that we've spoken to have really said that they haven't been paid, and this is money that's actually keeping them back. They're not possibly feeling safe, but they do want to stay back till their employers actually pay them. Commodore, if I can bring you in quickly, we've been talking about possibly the contingency plan that needs to go hand in hand. Currently, India has military assets. We have a naval asset in the Gulf of Eden, and obviously there are already indications that the Air Force is on standby. What sort of a turnaround do you think would be needed once the government gives the green signal?
You see, firstly, I find that this geopolitical crisis cannot last too long, and the ISIS does not have the capability to occupy Baghdad and go further down south to where the Shia areas, where the real oil wells are, where the crude is coming from. So, and much before that, I think some kind of intervention from US, etc., is likely to take place, even if it is by air. I don't think that ISIS can last too long. So I feel that this crisis is likely to blow over in few weeks, if not few days' time. But at the same time, I feel that a naval ship can only go and evacuate once the negotiations have been done. I mean, it can be only used in the transport manner, and there is no other manner we can use any of our warships. So if once the negotiations take place, or it is decided that the Indians are by and large going to be evacuated, then of course Navy can play a major role like it did in Lebanon, etc.
Right. You know, Commodore, there has been a suggestion.
But I feel, firstly, also feel that one point.
Go ahead, sir.
One point I want to tell you, that I don't think Saudi Arabia can help in this matter, because ISIS is a sworn enemy of Saudis, and it believes that that's an illegitimate regime, and it is totally against the Islamic principles. So I think there is no love lost between Saudis and ISIS. But if it is some other group, like the tribal Sunni groups, or the Naqshbandians, or the Ansars, then it is possible that Saudi Arabia can use some clout.
Okay.
But if it is ISIS, I don't think Saudis have any clout with ISIS.
Vijay, would you agree with that assessment? The Commodore of the assessment that the Saudis, in a sense, would really have no clout when it comes to negotiating with the ISIS?
Well, let me put it this way. Yesterday, the Iraqi government had very harsh words for the involvement of Saudi Arabia. Now, it is true that the Saudi government itself denies having any contact with ISIS, in fact, any contact with Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria. But it is also the case that individual princes have been known to be quite lavish with their donations to groups like ISIS, when ISIS was simply the Islamic State of Iraq.
Right.
It should also be, I think, in the frame that Exxon has evacuated its staff, that the United States Embassy in Baghdad has begun preliminary evacuation. The situation is extremely fluid. So this is a very dangerous moment. I think it's worth calling anybody who's friendly and asking them to involve themselves in trying to extricate the Indian nationals from their captivity.
Commodore, there has been a suggestion, and that's the question I was coming to you, that the Indian Air Force perhaps should be stationed in Baghdad for evacuations. My question to you is only in the context as to when you believe that time comes.
I think the better place to evacuate will be from Erbil, because there is some understanding between ISIS and the Kurdish people, because the Kurds and ISIS both are Sunnis, and so far any conflict between these two have been avoided. One of the checkposts ISIS was occupying, and when Kurds appeared, they fired at them, and Kurds turned around and went away. They did not take on ISIS. So there is some kind of understanding. Similarly, when the Kurds came and took over Kirkuk, there was no resistance either from ISIS groups which were there, or by the Iraqi government troops. So there is some kind of understanding between the Kurds and Nouri al-Malki's government, as well as between ISIS and the Kurdish government.
Okay.
So I think Erbil will be the safer place. We don't know what is going to happen to Baghdad.
Yes, absolutely, with the IS believed to be closing in on Baghdad. Ambassador Singh, I want to get away just for a brief moment from the diplomatic nuts and bolts which are obviously unfolding even as we speak. Many of the families really have seen the brutality of the ISIS on television screens, considering the fact that it's even shocked Al-Qaeda commanders negotiating with ISIS. How much of a tough order is that going to be, no matter which channel you choose, whether the humanitarian agencies, whether Saudi Arabia or other countries in West Asia?
Well, it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma for any country whose citizens are taken hostage. a country as powerful as US, had their diplomats taken hostage by Iran in 1979, and they had to suffer the humiliation for a year or more than a year. So this happens when your citizens are taken hostage. And we remember the Indian Airlines plane going to Kandahar. So the nation is used to it. But it is a challenge for the NDA-2 government, because this is their first challenge, and they've always prided themselves on a more muscular response and so on and so forth. So everybody will be watching to see how they play their cards.
Does it bother you, or does it strike you to the fact that the Ministry of External Affairs just gave out this one cryptic statement about the abduction, and there really has been no briefing or a briefing of the strategy or its options or what it wants to do?
Which is correct, because you don't give out too much detail. A, because you're not sure of all the facts, and B, why should you let the other side know how much you know and what all you're doing to counter it. So it's good to give it out. The information should be given out in very controlled manner, but it should be given out nevertheless. People are not going to wait interminably for it. So I think let's give them a little time. Suresh Reddy would have got back. Let them get their act together. Many of these things are resolved in the darkness of private negotiation rather than in the public space.
Right. Commodore, one word from you, and I think K.C. Singh perhaps dismissed some of those comments that came in either from families of the Indians abducted, but there's also one minister who's actually spoken out. Harsimrat Kaur Badal spoke to us a short while ago, and she said that till the afternoon the government was actually hoping they would be able to bring these 40 Indians, so perhaps there was some kind of communication, some kind of channel that they had opened. Then she went on to say that it's the construction companies which shifted the people and perhaps abandoned them. Would we look at it in the scope of just pure abandonment, or we now see this as these particular Indians being abducted?
No, I think we should be able to appreciate the constraints under which the government in this kind of environment works when there is completely chaotic situation. The local government is not under control. We do not know which groups are controlling what parts of the country. We know that Kurds are controlling Kirkuk. We know that in Salahuddin there are ISIS. We know that in Diyala and Fallujah there are tribal groups. So all this confusion, I think it is not easy for government to sort of immediately take action and be able to get our people back. As long as government is trying various channels which are possible, then I think it's a good thing. But I also want to bring the oil angle. The oil angle is very important. You see, there is total world consumption of oil every day is 91 million barrels per day.
That's right.
Out of which 3.5 million barrels is provided by Iraq.
That's right.
Now the oil market operates on sentiments. So even if there is a shortage of 500,000 barrels or 1 million barrels, though it is only 1% or less than 1%, but the oil prices tend to spike rapidly.
That's right.
And this would not be liked by the Western countries. For example, you may have seen that despite all the chaos in Libya, the first thing they got going was the oil wells.
That's right.
I think they would make sure that the ISIS is checked well before they can reach any of these oil sources, so that oil supplies are not disrupted.
Absolutely, Commodore, and I think that remains a big concern for India too. That's also exporting a big chunk of its oil. In fact, Iraq being that second supplier of oil. In fact, we looked at that entire oil energy space yesterday on India at 9 very, very exhaustively, and that remains a big concern. The Brent crude also constantly peaking up. I just want to give a sense to our viewers of the situation as it stands on the ground before I come back to both my panelists. Iraq's foreign minister has now asked the United States to launch airstrikes to contain the ISIS militants. In fact, earlier this week, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had said that the U.S. was considering this option to help Iraq. Meanwhile, the ISIS militants are closing in on the capital city of Baghdad. They've also targeted the largest oil refinery in that country. And CNN's Nick Robertson has the very latest coming in from Baghdad.
This oil refinery is very important to the Iraqi oil infrastructure in the country. If the militants can get control of it, then this is going to put a huge amount of pressure on the government to really launch ground forces that are capable of taking territory back from ISIS and the other rebel groups that are fighting with them and the tribes. But now they've gone back, perhaps with weapons that they've taken and looted from the major military bases here in the country that they've overrun in the past week, and have gone back and are now, it appears, launching an offensive rather than just encircling the refinery to actually take it, capture it and have it in their hands. I mean, people in Baghdad have become very familiar with a level of violence that anyone else in any city around the world would just find absolutely horrific. Multiple car bombs a day. Yesterday there were 5 car bombs in the city. One of them killed more than 10 people and wounded more than several dozen others. That was just one of those 5 car bombs. There are security incidents here.
Okay, so Nick Robertson reporting there from Baghdad, talking also about the attempts to capture the refinery. Vijay Prashad, if I can get you in on this overall picture, how soon, if you believe, would the United States actually come up with some kind of airstrikes? Pressure really building on all sides in that sense.
Well, look, the Iraqis have asked formally for the United States to conduct airstrikes on the ISIS position. But until an hour or so ago, the United States government has said they are not willing to launch any airstrikes. In fact, former General David Petraeus has said they would be counterproductive. So I was in Beirut in August when the United States was deciding whether to strike in Syria. And at that time as well, the U.S. was very reticent to strike and didn't strike. So I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for the cavalry to ride in this particular instance. I think the report is correct. ISIS and the Naqshband army and the Iraqi Islamic army are fighting in Bakuba, which is the last town on the road down to Baghdad. There have been several car bombs and inside Baghdad, in Sadr city, in New Baghdad. Will put pressure inside Baghdad by this kind of method. You forget that Fallujah, only about half an hour to 45 minutes away from Baghdad, was taken by ISIS in December.
Right.
So the pressure on Baghdad is very great. And I think one has to take this very seriously. You know, Baghdad could be it won't fall to ISIS, but it will be in the middle of a very dangerous battle, which will be terrible for the region.
Right. So the ISIS constantly increasing its footprint as far as northern Iraq is concerned. Gentlemen, I'm trying to close this debate now. Ambassador K.C. Singh has already left this particular panel. As the government perhaps is sitting on the drawing board trying to chalk out a strategy of how it's going to get these 40 Indians released, how it's perhaps going to evacuate the rest who are scattered all across that country. What do you believe the 2 points should be that they should be looking at very closely? Commodore, you can go first.
I think one is that they must negotiate from whatever channels available to try to find out which group is holding and how to reach that group, whether through the proxies or through directly. The second thing is that once that kind of negotiations are there, we should do, immediately divert some of our ships there to evacuate people who are in this danger area, or the Air Force planes, if we are to do it from Erbil. As I said, it will be much simpler to do it from Erbil than to do it from the Gulf.
Right. Vijay, do you want to go next?
I'll tell you that in 1991, former Ambassador K.P. Fabian oversaw the evacuation of 176,000 Indians from the region during Gulf War I. I would strongly recommend that the Indian government evacuate all Indians from Iraq. I don't think it's worthwhile to let people be. Because, we should really keep this in mind, that the German company Siemens had 50 workers at the Baiji oil refinery, and they evacuated them immediately. And they didn't wait even a day.
So you're saying it should have begun? Are you saying it should have begun already?
I think it should have begun already. I think it's a scandal that they didn't already meet.
I think we've lost Vijay just as he's making that very important point. Commodore, would you agree with that assessment? It should have begun already?
No, I think we should wait because I think situation should improve. You see, if there are about 15,000 Indians at the moment in Iraq, and it will be quite an exercise, and the fact that at the first signs of trouble, if we start evacuating, that would make our expatriates less acceptable in the Gulf region, etc. I think we should wait a little while.
Fair enough. Commodore, I'll have to thank you. The rest of my panelists are there. Well, Vijay Prashad, thanks very much for joining us here on India at